All right, here again. I'm gonna have to manually switch because I don't have my second monitor plugged in right now. All right, and let's get out of the YouTube setup. There we go. And present. My name's Mr. Barden. If you're watching that, I'm assuming you knew that. Um, this video here is going over the idea of basic music notation in the Western classical music practice as part of the course. Um, Normally, when I do this for my students, I break it up into two separate lessons for what I'm going to go over today. But I'm just going to, for this video, go through talking all about pitch and rhythm. That I'm not going to talk about little symbols and things we can add in to the music for expressive uh, notations or techniques and things like that. But that could be its whole own video, and I pull that up as it becomes relevant for my students. So I'm not going to get into that today. Just know that this is not an exhaustive course. This is just kind of the basics of it. Um, that being said, if you have any questions, put those down in the comments. Like, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff, and we're going to just jump right into it. All right, so music notation kind of came about as a way for the composer, the person to communicate to the performer what they wanted to have happen. Um, as time progressed, music notation became more and more standard, so that way, if one person wrote the music, they could give it to people that they didn't know over large distances, and they could still play it and play the same thing. They could have multiple people playing music all at the same time. And everyone would know, be able to interpret what's going on and what's things like that. I'm not going to get into the history of music notation and all of that because that's a whole big long discussion that people spend years studying, and we're just not going to get into it. But again, the main thing is that the notation is a set of different symbols that allow musicians to interpret what notes to play, how long to play them, how fast to play them, um, what kind of soft, loud, hard, short, long, however, the composer wants them to be played, and they can all allow for multiple people to play at the same time. So I've got a picture of this orchestra, and I'm not sure which one it is because I just Googled, free orchestra, and there we go. All right. Moving on and getting into it, the pitch notation. So music notation has two main elements, pitch and rhythm. I'm going to start with this class that I teach. We've talked a lot about musical pitch so far, but we haven't really dived into how, or dived in. We haven't gotten to, how to really notate out music. So we put notes on a musical staff. This staff is a collection of 5 horizontal lines, equally spaced, and then depending on where the note on the line or in the space in between them, sometimes outside of them, but on this staff, it tells the performer what note to play. Just remember that a note is a specific frequency of sound on the instrument. Um, so again, a staff is just these 5 horizontal lines, and then we can put the note wherever we want to go. Again, each line or space, it'll go through what's called the head of the note. Um, Tells us what pitch we're playing. On all staffs, though, the higher up on the staff is a higher note, lower on the staff. All right. As for what note each line and space is, that depends on the clef that is being used with that staff. A clef is a symbol that goes the musical staff that tells us, again, what each line and space is in terms of the pitch. There are many, many different kinds, and I'm not going to get into all of them, but the two nowadays, and the ones that I'm going to be using in this class almost exclusively, if I can help it at least, are the treble and bass clef. Bass clef is used for lower notes. Treble clef is used for higher notes. Again, you can see on the staff, it is lower pitches, and as we move up, the pitches also get higher. When they're grouped together like this, it's called the grand staff. So again, piano music or a wide range of notes will sometimes be notated like this. And again, this is called the grand staff because it's got all the notes. Yeah, grand staff. Into how to read each one, though, I do want to point out the idea of octave designations. So if you haven't already, I'll tell you right now that the notes repeat in a cycle. Okay, and I'm going to illustrate that by playing some stuff on a keyboard right now. So I'm just going to play a C major scale. I played that scale in 2 octaves, 2 cycles of the C major scale. So you can see on the keyboard diagram here, pattern repeats because we have this what's the same note but in different octaves. All right, these double the frequency. So let's just say this is not right, but I'm gonna say for the easy math that this is 100 hertz. The next octave up will be 200. The next octave 100 or 400. Sorry, it's each one doubles. But that's great and all. But where I'm going with this is that if you just said play C are you talking about? Because I've just played 3 right here. There's there we go. There's on this on a full-sized keyboard, which you can see here, there's 8. It's not very concise. So that's why when we're referring to pitches by name, a lot of times you'll see that there is a number there. So generally the lowest note on a standard piano, that low A, is A0. Move up, and then every time we hit C, that becomes a new octave. So the number goes up. So we get C1, all the way D1, E1, M, B1, then C2, the next C, C3. Again, that's basically the middle C on the keyboard. I'll come back to that phrase in a second, and so on and so forth throughout the whole thing. So basically, I just want to introduce the idea that there's the note within an octave. That octave has a specific designation for how high or low it is. So again, the lower the number, the lower the octave. That's important. The reason it's important is because these clefs tell us which play specifically, not just play a random G, but play this specific one. All right, so I'll start with the bass clef actually, because I think it's a little more clear to see. But you notice the bass clef, sideways frowny face. It's got this big curve and these 2 dots. The 2 dots go around the line for F3. Right here. Again, that's F3 on this line, the second from the top. Using that, you can then very easily say, okay, F3, here's C, here, D3, E, F, G, A. You can find all of the notes with that specific octave. So we can say, put a note in a certain spot. Whoever's looking at it knows, oh, I'll use that's F. I know to make this exact frequency when I see this note. All right. The treble clef works the same way, except you see how it's got this line and a big swirl. This swirl centers around the G4 line. And again, it's the same way. So if this second from the bottom line is G, we know that the next space down is F, the next line down is E, F, G, A, B. Up here we get to C5, D, E. Again, the cycle repeats, and so on. Because these clefs identify G4 and F3, you'll sometimes hear them referred to as a G clef or an F clef, but that's a bit more of an older, uh, naming scheme. Treble and bass clef is basically standard. We'll get more practice doing this over, as time goes. So if this just seems super confusing, don't worry. As this class goes on, we get more practice. But just know that with the treble clef, the line squiggle, this second to bottom line, that is G4. So again, whenever a performer sees a specific note, they know exactly which one to worry about. Oh crud, which G do I hit? Oh, I specifically know I need to, if I saw a note way up on this high G, I know to hit that G as opposed to that G. Okay, ledger lines. These are important because there's only 5 lines and 4 spaces. 4 spaces? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's an optical illusion. But there's only 5 lines and 4 spaces on any staff. Sometimes you want more than that in terms of notes. So we have ledger lines. These are lines that you draw in for each past the boundaries of the staff. You can go above or below. Doesn't really, just depends on what you need. And again, you're essentially just adding more lines for that note. So here, because this is treble, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G would be the top space. A is where we would start. So this is going to be an octave lower, but here we get thing, and then again, we jump up. So we start on that D, E, F, G, A, B, really high C. My tiny little keyboard I'm using doesn't have that big of a range. So, but again, we lines to go outside of the boundaries of the musical staff. One thing that I think is really helpful is when we're looking at a grand staff again. I mentioned the phrase middle C before. C4 on the piano. This is called middle C because on the grand staff, again, the staff with the treble and bass clef, middle C is the note immediately in. Again, if you count up from the bass clef, here's the that F line right here where my mouse is. F, G, A, B on the top staff, C right here. And then if we count G from the treble clef, we get G, F, E, D on the space, C, one ledger line below. That's where everything lines up and maps. So we can get a steady, uh, that just pivoting on this. No, why do we do that? Using a weird mouse today, so I think I hit a button by mistake. Well, I'm doing this live, and I don't really care. I'm just gonna keep going. All right, so again, middle C is where the treble and bass clefs can hopefully make things a little less confusing. Most people who play instruments, again, their instrument will only play in one clef at a single time. If you play something like a piano or something with a large range, you have to get used to reading 2 at the same time. Sometimes more than that. It's not that bad, but again, it just takes practice. Moving on. So far, I've only been using the white keys on the keyboard, none of the black ones. And again, these black keys on the keyboard kind of serve as a step between the whole step of most of the white keys. All right, we can designate that in the music that we want specifically, a difference with an accidental. These symbols, the sharps or flats, tell us to either raise or lower a note. These apply only to the specific note in that octave and every measure. I'll talk about measures in a second. There's other ones besides sharps and flats, but we don't use them that much. You'll see some on the next slide. So again, a sharp looks like the tic-tac-toe or hashtag sign, but it's got that kind of pivot to it. That tells us to raise the pitch by 1/2 step. So if this is F sharp instead will move up on the keyboard to F sharp. And that happens to be this black key right there. Natural tells us to, let's say we had F sharp, we would instead play the out an accidental. A flat tells us to just do the opposite. So instead of going up, we're going to go down 1/2 step. So if we had B up here and then B flat, we move down to the next key. We then get double sharps and double flats, which have us move 2 spaces or a whole step on the keyboard. And then, again, we get even weirder ones that sometimes you move left. There's a whole rabbit hole we could go down that I'm not going to go on. But again, just to illustrate that, that this only applies to that note in that octave, I'll play this little example on the keyboard. So again, the F sharp only applies to the Fs on this space throughout the measure. It doesn't apply to this higher F. This line here gives us a new measure of music, so all of the accidentals get reset. So this is F, and then as we move left to right as time progresses, F sharp. The bottom one is not F sharp, it's F natural, because the F sharp only applies to Fs up here and any following it in that measure. So again, we'll get more practice with normally when I teach this course, I would take a pause and say, okay, here are some notes with some octaves, notate it on a staff, on a grand staff. I'm not going to here because again, it's a pre-recorded video. But I'm going to move on to talking about rhythm. But again, those are the key elements of pitch notation. That being that we put it on a, which is the 5 lines and the 4 spaces between them. Vertically up is a higher pitch. Vertically lower is a lower pitch. The clef that what frequencies, what note each line and space is. Again, treble clef means that this line where my mouse is a G. We move down, that's F, A, B, C, D, E. Again, that repeats based on the keyboard cycle here. And we designate the octave in that repeating pattern with numbers here. One little side note, you'll notice E and F and B and C don't have a black key in between them. That's just so we get this asymmetrical pattern, so that way you can tell, where the octave, that wasn't an octave, where the, where in that pattern you are on the keyboard, what's higher, what's lower. Because otherwise, if it was just a single, repeating pattern that was symmetrical, you would have no idea you were playing. It would be impossible to play a chord and know exactly what it would be, because the pattern would be a little weird. So by having the 2 then 3 black keys, tell where the octave is and how it repeats and where all the notes lie in between. All right, that's just a little side note. Again, there we can go past the boundaries of the staff with ledger if we want to. All right, and then we can raise or lower a note by 1 or more half steps, or less, but basically 1/2 step with an. All right, let's talk about rhythm. All right, so bars, and these aren't the kinds you can get drinks at. So a musical staff gets broken up into repeated rhythmic chunks by lines called bar lines. You can see here's some bar lines right here. The space in here is where we put the music, and as we move horizontally through, left to right through time is progressing. So each measure is a specific amount of time. How we notate the music within it tells us how we're dividing up that time. Syncing everything up with the bar lines um, and with everything else, we can get all of the performers performing at the same time to make all of their music line up, and that's how we can get chord, you know, whether that wasn't technically a chord, but through different people all at the same time. So again, the in between the bar lines, we get what are called measures. And again, accidentals, every measure or at every bar line, they reset. Okay. In addition to measures, we get time signatures. And these things that look like tell us how to divide up that measure in time. So the top number of the time signature tells us how many divisions of the measure there are, or how many beats. So here we have 4. So the measures following this time signature can be broken up into 4 equal parts. I'm going to skip the C's for now. Um, these two here broken up into 2 equal parts. This one is 3. This one is 6. This can technically be any number that you want. It's just how many times you divide up the measure. It can be whatever number you want for your music. Generally, they tend to be, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12, 8, stuff like that. But it can be whatever you need for that. The bottom number tells the note value receives 1 beat. Meaning, okay, so we have 4 beats, but what is a beat? So in 4/4, we have 4 beats. Each beat is a quarter note. In 2/2, we have 2 beats, and each beat is 2 divisions of the measure, or half of the measure. 2/2 half notes as we get on. 2/4 is 2 quarter notes. 3/4 is 3 quarter notes. So 3, it's just 1 more beat compared to 4 and 1 less than the 4/4. 6/8 is 6 beats of 8th notes. So to illustrate that, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, another measure 2, 3, 4. And again, this one, if I was to beat the half notes, measure, measure, and so on. 4/4 is common, very frequently used, so it's called common time. So if you ever see music with the C, it's 4/4. Some C. The C with the slash, think of it as like you're cutting common time in half. That is 2/2. So instead of thinking of 4 beats of 4, we get 2 beats of 2. It notated almost the same, but we're dividing it up differently. Whenever I teach this class, I never use these. That's a little bit of an older standard to use. It's more common in music now to see it spelled out with the just because that's explicitly clear what they want. One last thing to note, though, and again, we'll get a little practice with looking at time signatures, is that the bottom number generally it can't be anything like. All right, they're all even divisions of the measure, and they're always a multiple of 2. So you can get 2, 4, 8. I'm sorry, it's a power of 2. 2, 4, 8, 2, 64, and so on. So these are probably the most common bottom numbers in a time signature to get. They don't really go past that, commonly speaking, but you can see that in music. All right. The last little bit before we get into some practice is just the tempo of the music, and that's just essentially how fast each beat is. So again, we've mentioned that moving left to right is progressing in time, but how fast is that? Um, this is some percussion notation. I'm not going to dive into details of it, but in music you'll see a lot of this equals and then some number or range of numbers. This number here is the number of beats per minute in the music. So at 80 beats per we would do that. So basically, reading this music at the lower tempo, we would play 80 quarter notes over the course of 1 minute. Now, I think this thing here has a metronome. So this is 120 beats per minute. Let me stick it down to 80. Almost there. So this is 80 beats per minute. So you would do this da 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 da. I'll stop it that way because that will get annoying. Okay, so you've noticed that the music here looks different from each other. Depending on how long each note lasts in the within the beats is how we draw them. So they get bigger than this, but generally a whole note 4/4, a whole note, again, gets 4 beats. It's 4 quarter notes. This is a little misleading because if you're ever in something other than 4/4, you're not going to get 4 beats. You're going to get 4 quarter notes. That's the one thing I about this graphic. But again, a whole note here is just a hollow circle. If you're getting real specific, the edges are a little fatter, but a hollow circle. A half note, again, hollow circle with a stem. And 2 half notes equal 1 whole note. That should be pretty standard. Half, 2 halves make a whole. A quarter note is just like a half note, except we've now filled in. It's solid right there. So 4 quarter notes make a whole note. 2 quarter notes make a half note. Again, it's basic fractions. We go down again. 8th note. These have a single on them. So again, an 8th note is half of a quarter note. So 2 8th notes equal 1 quarter note. 2 quarter notes equal 1 half note. 2 half notes equal 1 whole. I bet you'll never guess where I'm going with 16th notes, and the fact that 2 16th make an 8th. So again, as we dive on, each duration is divided in half. So if a quarter note is 1 beat, like it says here, an 8th note is half a beat, a 16th note is a quarter of a beat. In a single measure of 4/4 or a single whole note, 2 half notes, 4 quarter notes, 8 16ths, 16 or 8 eighths, or 16 16ths. We can go further than this by dividing 16ths in half. We get 32nd notes and 64th notes and 100 goes on as much as you need, but pretty much anything past 32nd notes gets very difficult to accurately count out the relationships to. That being said, they still exist. We can use other ways to notate these as well. And to make life a little bit easier, we will beam together notes within a beat to make it easier to read. So I've got this graphic. So up top here we have 8th notes. Instead of having a single flag, we've beamed them together with a single beam so we can see the group here. 16th notes have 2, like the 16th note on the last slide had 2 flags. So we would add another beam for a 32nd note, another for a 64th, and so on. A few other things that are here that I have. You can what's called tie together multiple notes to combine their value into a single note. So that's what's happening right here. Another thing we can do is add a dot immediately following the note. And what this will do is add half of the note's value. So a half note would be equal to 2 quarter notes normally. Well, a dotted half note is equal to 3, because 2 is 1, 2 plus 1 is 3. There you go. Just like down here, we have a dotted quarter note, so that would be 3/8 notes, because 2/8 notes normally in a quarter note, we add half of 2 is 1, 2 plus 1. The only other thing up here is when we beam them in threes, and we indicate this with a 3. This essentially just means we are putting 3 of a note inside the space of 2. And I'll show that in a second. It's called a triplet. So normally you would get 2, da, 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 and now we get da, 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 da. We get 3 in the same space. So this is going to be really boring because this is all on the same G, but I'm going to play through this on the keyboard here. All right, it's on. And I'm going to just tap the tempo on my... So I'm going to do it kind of slow. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 2, 2. And I just stopped right here where this what's called a rest is later. But again, you can see that I'm beating each beat on my chest, and I'm playing the note. So this was 4 beats, 2, 1, half a beat. So I played, the next one would be again twice that. So, and so on. The next one here we get the ties. So, oh sorry. 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 4, 1. You see, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. 3, 4, and so on. So we can see that, again, we're holding this longer one out for 3 beats. We're holding this one out for 1.5 beats. So, and so on. The last one, just to play it. 3, 4. My chest is kind of sore after all that. So we can see that we're grouping 3 notes into the same space that only fit. It's a little bit faster. All right, so that's again talking about all the basic rhythm notations right there. So by combining this with the pitch notation, that's how we get. So we'll say just to play a thing. I'm just kind of messing around, but by combining what pitch we want with the duration and the rhythmic value, create music. And those are the 2 main elements of music notation. Again, there are more. Again, we can talk about whether or not to play a note, soft, smooth or short, whether it's loud or quiet. This piano doesn't do that, but loud or quiet, things like that. And again, there's a whole stuff that I just don't have time to get into for right now, but that covers most of the basics. So again, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, please feel free to put them down in the comments, and I will see those and respond. Otherwise, that's about it. Like, subscribe, do all the things. While I'm talking, I'm transitioning back into my streaming software because I can't just have it open on the other monitor. As I mentioned before, I'm setting up a new computer. Next time you see me posting videos, it'll be on a whole different setup. But until then, my home desk scenario is a real mess. Anyways, I'm rambling at this point, so I'm gonna end the video.